miles per gallon, lowest since 1980. They were soft on the pesticide, herbicide industry. They gave the genetic engineering industry a free ride. They didn't do anything about protecting children who are excessively vulnerable to toxics. And of course, the Bush administration is just extending that. And I would say that the Bush administration is heading for deep political trouble, because it's okay for Bush during the campaign to exert rhetoric about pro-environmentalism. His rhetoric now is going to imperil the Republican Party, because if there's one consensus in this country, it's the right to breathe clean air, the right to drink clean water, the right to have safe food.
Mr. Nader, I've known you a long time, and I'm terribly disappointed that you're so far off base on that, but I'm going to give you something we might be able to agree on. Christy Whitman, the Environmental Protection Administrator, sent a memo to the President, which was leaked and appeared in the Washington Post today, I believe, and she had just come back from a meeting with some of her European colleagues and said that there were, in the memo, that this global warming, this notion of global warming was a terrible problem, and that the President had to achieve credibility with the Europeans by taking a tough stand. Now, whatever you think about global warming, and I think it's a ridiculous concept, isn't that the worst reason for doing it, to achieve credibility with the Europeans?
Well, she was using diplomatic language. What she's really saying is the overwhelming scientific consensus is that we're heading into trouble here. The insurance industry in the U.S. and especially in Europe recognize this. BP, the petroleum company CEO, recognizes this. Paul O'Neill, the Secretary of the Treasury for Mr. Bush, recognizes this. And we can have the best of both worlds here by improving fuel efficiency and therefore reducing pollution from motor vehicles and power plants, saving the fuel dollars of the American people and working families. You also reduce greenhouse gases. You should understand that. You should understand that your President Bush is going to go down in contemporary history as the secondary Marie Antoinette. Let them drink arsenic.
He's just being reasonable, Ralph.
Remember, Tom DeLay is his environmental hero. Okay, Senator Bond, I want to ask you about this. I don't agree with any of these decisions Bush has made so far.
Good.
But I can understand.
That's a good start.
Right.
I think that's helpful.
Maybe I can understand both sides of them, except the arsenic one. Let me just show you what one of your colleagues, Dick Durbin from Illinois, had to say about the reversing the rules on arsenic. Here it is.
Ronald Reagan tried to tell us that ketchup was a vegetable. Now George Bush is trying to tell us that arsenic is a flavor enhancer in our drinking water.
I mean, please, Senator, isn't the least we could do to our kids, for our kids, is to get the arsenic out of their drinking water?
That is exactly what Christy Whitman has pledged to do. There is not going to be any change in the standards in drinking water for 5 years, even under the previous standard. Now, she agrees, and the President agrees, that the current standard of 50 parts is too high. But what is the right standard? There's no science on it yet. And like so many other last-minute decisions put out by the Clinton administration, this is the regulatory equivalent of the Mark Rich pardon. It was done without science, without justification. It's about time that somebody took a look at it, because I'll tell you what happens when you have unrealistically low standards. Small water supply systems shut down and subject their consumers to much greater dangers. Well, and she is going to publish a standard that is below 50 parts, but it is going to be one based on science. And there's not going to be any delay in implementation.
Senator, that's just not so.
Oh, it is so.
Wait a minute. The National Academy of Sciences has looked at this. They pointed out that arsenic in the drinking water at the present levels causes bladder cancer and lung cancer. They showed that the rules haven't been changed since 1942, and they called for immediately reducing those levels. How can you go up against the greatest, probably the most, well-known scientific academy in this country and say there's no science?
I'm not going up against them. You're going up against the facts. Let me straighten you out. Number one, everybody agrees that the 50 parts is too high.
Why wait?
Because the actual level has not been determined. What is the right level? The right level that the Clinton administration said 5 years from now we will implement this new standard. Okay. They're still going to make that time frame, but they're going to do so based on science as to what the proper standard is. it may well be that 10 parts is too small, and we may harm more people by putting small rural water supply systems out of business.
Of course, you know, people who may not understand this, isn't people coming along and poisoning the wells with arsenic. These are natural. They're natural.
Arsenic occurs in natural occurrence.
The 10 parts is
Why
too,
is the mining industry? Well, the 10 parts per billion is the European standard.
Yeah.
10 parts
Well,
per
the
billion.
Europeans do everything wrong.
Mining has nothing to do with it, of course.
But let me just tell you, Mr. Nader, the American Water Works Association, I think they know what they're doing. They've been frantic until they were saved by President Bush. It was going to cost them $1.4 billion. $1.4 billion to convert to take care of this Clinton standard, and $600 million a year. Is the whole green Nader plan just to put American business out of work so that people are on the breadlines?
Where do you get those figures, Bob?
American Water Works Association.
Yeah. Did you examine them, or do you think they're a little exaggerated?
I think they're totally accurate.
How much you think thousands of cancer victims and bladder victims and all kinds of other consequences of arsenic for 15 million Americans who are exposed to this, and this standard is supposed to protect?
Well,
and by the way,
what's your evidence of that?
that's the studies that were made on it. National Academy of Sciences, as Bill mentioned. You know, here's the point. Don't get on the side, Bob, of defending arsenic. It's a loser, believe me.
Let me defend CO2, which is carbon dioxide, which is something we breathe out every day. And the president was asked in March 14th in New Jersey if he was responding to pressure when he reversed a very foolish campaign statement he made. Let's hear what the president said.
I was responding to reality. And reality is the nation has got a real problem when it comes to energy. I am concerned that if we don't act in a common sense way, that our people will not be able to heat and cool their homes.
And about the same time, Senator Larry Craig of Idaho said, and let me quote, "If you attempt to regulate carbon dioxide, you will regulate us into a permanent energy crisis in this country." Now, is that what you want to do? Have a permanent energy crisis because you're trying to go with this eco-extremism on carbon dioxide?
Do you know anything about industrial efficiency? You ever read the book Natural Capitalism by a businessman in the Lovins? The point is that the more...
Amory Lovins!
He's persuaded more utility...
I was reading about him in the Carter administration.
He's persuaded more top-flight utility executives to move toward conservation than anybody in the country. Let me put it this way. One thing I hope I'll get through to you in the next 10 years, Bob, is that when you make power plants more efficient, when you make motor vehicles more efficient, you are reducing carbon dioxide, you are reducing global warming gases, you are reducing the greatest threat to the environment.
Just won't have an economy, right?
Oh, no. Efficiency is good for the economy. Waste is bad. A wasteful economy is a weak economy.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that. I want to pick up on that. I mean, this baloney we're hearing here, that there's the environment on one side and the economy on the other, is just absolute crap. Senator, you know, as Rob pointed out, Shell Oil, Dow Chemical, Ford Motor, Daimler Chrysler, General Motors, and British Petroleum have all said they've dropped their opposition to the Kyoto Accords. They've all said global warming is real. They've all said we got to do something, and the place to start is carbon dioxide emissions. So wouldn't you agree that Bush is not only out of step with the environmentalists, he's out of step with the leaders of American industry?
No, he's absolutely right. One thing that I would agree with is we can reduce CO2 emissions, and that's by going to nuclear energy. But so many of you radical left-wing Democrats have opposed nuclear energy. That is the one source of energy that does not generate CO2. Fossil fuels generate CO2, and we are getting much more efficient because we're generating 3 times the energy from coal and with 1/3 the pollutants. And we should emphasize conservation, emphasize better environmental standards. But to try to regulate CO2 now would cause an even greater problem. What you Democrats have done to California would happen to the rest of the country. Pricing energy out of the sea.
May I point out that Pete Wilson signed that bill? No Democrat signed that bill. That was a Republican plan, and it failed.
Oh, that's not a Republican. That's a Democratic plan. This is why you're having grayouts.
It was drafted by PG&E and Edison, passed by the legislature, both Democrats and Republicans unanimously in 1996, and signed by Republican Pete Wilson.
You're talking to the former Democratic chairman.
Oh,
California.
know.
Okay,
I'm
we're going to
impressed
take a
with
break.
that. I'm impressed with
And
that.
when we come back, we will explore what political contributions from business or from the environmentalists are affecting policy. Welcome back to Crossfire. If President Bush has his way, we may hear the sound of drilling on the Alaskan tundra before long. Is that because of big oil pouring big money into the Republicans, or could it possibly be that the president is just trying to find more domestic energy supplies for the country? We're asking former Green Party presidential candidate, consumer advocate Ralph Nader, and Republican Senator Kit Bond of Missouri, a member of the Senate Environment Committee. Bill.
Senator Bond, the president's made no secret of his desire to open up the Arctic wilderness for new exploration, at least give him credit for that. The Natural Resources Defense Council has featured that issue in a new television ad that's just starting. I'd like you to listen to part of it, please.
What do you call someone who would drill our Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, where there's hardly any oil?
Now, even your colleague, Republican colleague, Senator Bob Smith, says it would be wrong to open up the last great wilderness area of this country for what is probably at best a 60-day supply of oil. They're right, aren't they?
That's wrong, wrong, and wrong. And I'm sorry that my friend Bob Smith may have taken that position, because I've been there. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge has one small part that was set aside in 1980 in an agreement between Songus, Jackson, and those senators from Alaska for oil exploration. About 1.5 million acres out of the 19 million acres. I've been up there. Most of the people who talk about the North Slope have never been there. It is a frozen desert, most godforsaken place I've ever been. Yet still, the drilling goes on there only in the dead of winter with a very small footprint. And the caribou love it. The caribou herd has increased ninefold. And frankly, the projections for oil in the Arctic coastal region between 5 and 16 billion barrels of oil, enough to replace the oil we're getting from Iraq for about 54 years. That's the most significant area for adding to the supply of domestic energy that we have.
Of course, we don't get much oil from Iraq, but why aren't
we
the
do.
oil,
We get close
why aren't
over.
the oil companies? Why aren't the oil companies drilling where Clinton gave them an opportunity in North Slope? All kinds of areas they're not drilling. Why do they want to open up this refuge? Why don't they drill where they have the right to drill now?
Well, it might have something to do, Ralph, with where the oil is, because they have geological instruments that tell them where the oil is likely to be. I can assure you, if they had places where they could drill, where they think oil is likely to be, they would do that. This happens to be one of the best prospects.
But the others are prospects too. They're not exploring.
Well, if it's good prospects, why don't you and your friends go up and explore there?
Just quickly, here's what I don't understand. During the campaign, President Bush slammed Bill Clinton for not doing enough to come down hard on OPEC. And he said, when I'm president, I'm going to call OPEC and say, don't you dare turn off the spigot. Well, you know, Senator, twice in the last 2 months, OPEC has decreased production. George Bush hasn't said one word. In fact, over the weekend, Energy Secretary said Abraham says, we're not going to ask OPEC to increase production. Why have they suddenly gone so cowardly on OPEC now that he's in the White House?
Well, they're not going cowardly on OPEC. They realize that the energy situation in this country is a disaster. For after 8 years of an anti-energy policy, when we did nothing but curtail sources of supply, even tried to take down hydropower dams, took land out of production and exploration for coal, natural gas, oil. We did not develop any new refineries. We are suffering a severe shortage of domestic energy production. We're going to need all sources, and to the extent that we can jawbone OPEC, that's helpful, but we also have to take control of our energy future in our own hands.
Ralph Nader, I hate to correct you because I've always had a lot of respect for you, but we get a lot of oil from Iraq right now, and there is plenty of oil in the Anwar. It's about the equivalent of a Saudi Arabia, and I want to run
Say that again.
It's equivalent of a Saudi Arabia. It really is.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Saudi Arabia has over 250 billion barrels of reserves so far.
I want to show you. I want to show you
This is fiction.
I want to show you an ad that's more accurate than the one that Bill showed. This is put on by the Arctic Power Energy Stewardship Alliance, which is a nice name. And let's put that on.
20 years ago, Congress set aside a small part of Alaska to provide for our energy security. Geologists report it could be the largest supply of oil ever discovered in America. We can balance our need for energy and our concern for the environment. That's why 75% of Alaskans support energy exploration in Anwar.
So, are you more interested in fuzzy animals than people?
I'm more interested in future generations being able to enjoy rare wilderness areas, number one, and that involves preserving this little area. You know, the biggest source of fuel in this country is right in Detroit. 1 mile per gallon efficiency upgrade for the motor vehicles that are rolling off those production lines, and that'll replace the most optimistic findings of oil in Anwar.
I want to ask you one more question. You know, Bill was, I thought Bill was going to come out and attack the administration for receiving all the money from energy sources. Well, there's no time. But let me just say, I can't understand the whining that goes on by the environmentalists when during the last campaign, the environmentalists contributed $1.2 million to the Democrats and $97,000 to the GOP. Payback time, isn't it, against those people? They were for the other side.
Are the Republicans that petty? They jeopardized adults and children in this country to more toxics, to destruction of the federal forest, to arsenic, to carbon dioxide. You know something? There's a serious information gap in this administration. And we really have more debates at the National Press Club.
We will have more debates, I promise you, but this one is over. Senator Biden, thanks so much for coming in. I can see you ready to jump in there. Hate to head it off. Ralph
Nader, take a big race here and wipe out all these.
Thank you for coming back here to Crossfire, Ralph Nader. We'll have you both back in debate, energy and the environment. Bob Novak and I will be back with closing comments and our solution to the energy crisis. We'll be right back. Bob, you know, I've been working on these environmental issues for 30 years, starting in California. I have to tell you, in all that time, Bob, I never met one person who said, I need more arsenic in my drinking water. Even you have to admit that is extreme for Bush.
Well, that's silly, and you know it. But let me ask you this. Are you ready now, Bill, to admit that we have now, to solve our energy problem, a clean, efficient, 21st century kind of power, nuclear power? It's a time for the nukes. Are you ready to admit that?
I am not going to admit it until you tell me what you're going to do with the nuclear waste and what you're going to do with all the people who have cancer because of exposure to nuclear power.
I'll tell you next week, but you're an eco-extremist. You know that?
I'm proud of it. From the left, I'm Bill Press. Good night for Crossfire.
From the right, I'm Robert Novak. Join us again next time for another edition of Crossfire.